forward to testify, give the testifier sheet to the page or the committee clerk. And if you are testifying today, feel free to move forward. You don't have to sit in the back. If you do not wish to testify but would like to indicate your position on the bill, please complete the sign-in sheets on the back of the table. The sheets will be included as an exhibit in the official hearing record. In your Urban Affairs Committee, we use the light system to promote maximum engagement of those wishing to express their position on proposed legislation before us. The light system will generally be 5 minutes with the green light, 1 minute with yellow, and red to ask you to conclude. We will recognize opponents, proponents, and neutral testifiers. We also will acknowledge letters received from all concerned parties. Should you have handouts you wish to share, please share 10 copies or ask the committee clerk to make copies. The clerk will then distribute any handouts to all committee senators. Following all proponents, opponents, and neutral testimony, the bill presenter is offered an opportunity to close and give their final remarks. As a committee, we will work diligently to give a fair and full hearing. We will make every effort to accommodate special requests of assistance. At this hearing, we ask you to be respectful of the process and to one another. Please silence your phones or turn them off. Senator Jacobson, you're willing to open. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Chairman McKinney and members of the Urban Affairs Committee. My name is Senator Mike Jacobson, Mikejacobson. I represent District 42. Today I'm introducing LB 33, which is I'm bringing on behalf of the League of Municipalities. The issue of when a mayor can vote is often a matter of discussion among city attorneys at times, and it can be challenging to determine in which situations the law allows the mayor to vote. State law used to have language saying that the mayor can vote when his or her vote will be, quote, decisive and the council is equally divided, end of quote. In other words, the mayor can vote when there is a tie. About 10 years ago, that language was changed to the current law, which provides that a mayor can vote when his or her vote, quote, would provide the additional vote required to attain the number of votes equal to a majority of the number of members elected to the city council, end of quote. According to legislative transcript, the reason for the change was that many items are required to be approved by the majority of those elected to the city council. So when a city has a 4-person council and one person is gone, the city would have a 2-to-1 vote, which is not enough to pass the item because the city needs the majority of those elected, which would be 3 council members. So in those circumstances, allowing the mayor to vote makes sense. Challenges arise from the current language because it seems to allow a mayor to vote in situations where a majority of all members of the council are required, but does not allow the mayor to vote when the situation only requires a majority vote of the quorum. For example, on an 8-person council, if the vote is tied 4-4 on a matter that requires, quote, a majority of all members, then the mayor could vote to break the tie. If the vote were tied on a matter that only requires a majority of the quorum, then the mayor is not able to vote. Examples in state law of matters that require a majority vote for quorum, which presumes that the mayor cannot vote under the current law, are as follows. Passage of general ordinances, bylaws, and resolutions, emergency transfer of funds, appointment of city officials such as clerk, treasurer, attorney, etc. Examples in state law of matters that require a majority vote of all council members, which presumes that the mayor can vote under the current law, would be all ordinances, resolutions, or orders for the appropriation of money, passing an ordinance or resolution to enter into a contract, and annexations. There are also votes that require a supermajority of the city council, such as a 2/3 vote or 75% vote of the council, where the mayor is not allowed to vote in these circumstances. The new language being proposed in this bill would be that the bill attempts to clarify some of the confusion about when a mayor can vote. With the new language, a mayor in a city of the first class or a city of the second class can vote on any matter that requires either a majority of the city council or a majority of vote of all elected members of the city council if the mayor's vote is required due to the city council being equally divided. In other words, when there's a tie. Or B, a majority of the city council, a majority of all elected members cannot be reached due to absence, vacancy, abstention, or abstention of one or more city council members. The new language addresses three concerns. It allows the mayor to vote when there is a tie. It allows the mayor to vote when a majority of the quorum is needed. And it allows the mayor to vote when a majority of all members elected to the council is needed. Important to note, this bill does not apply to villages, Lincoln, or Omaha. Villages do not have a mayor, and Lincoln and Omaha have their own rules because they are home rule charter cities. Also important to note that the bill does not allow the mayor to vote when a supermajority vote of the council is required. And I would end my testimony and entertain any questions. Senator.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Are there any questions? Senator Blood?
Thank you, Chairperson Kenny. I just have a quick question. Who brought this bill to you?
It originally came to me through the League of Municipalities, and we actually had a circumstance in North Platte where I witnessed this happening. And so we had this discussion about it. And so they worked the bill and brought it together. There are experts here in the audience, one individual in particular who's very knowledgeable of the background on this. And I would encourage you to, any deep questions, I know is prepared to testify in favor of the bill and could answer some really tough questions, but give me the softballs.
That was really my only question.
Perfect.
Question. But now I kind of want to come up with a hard one.
Well, I figured that. Knowing you, I thought you'd ask that.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any proponents to LB 33?
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. That was a great summary of the bill. My name is John Hines, Johnhines. I am an attorney at the Prairie Huff Law Firm in Sioux City, Iowa, and am the assistant city attorney for South Sioux City, Nebraska, and Dakota City, Nebraska. And the question of mayor voting is something that has come up in both of those communities every year that I've worked at Prairie Huff. And so I assisted the league in creating the new language for the bill. Did a lot of research on the history and origin of the existing language, and understand that developed over time, but in a way that has caused some confusion for our council members and our mayors. And I think that the new language of the bill isn't perfect, but gets much closer to allowing our council members and our mayor to understanding before a meeting when the mayor is going to be allowed to vote or not, instead of having to rely on council at the city council table, legal counsel, to render an opinion on the fly about whether the mayor is allowed to vote or not, which has happened. And in fact, for South Sioux City, we have a 5-page cheat sheet on when the mayor is allowed to vote or not, based on whether it's a matter that requires a majority of all of the members elected or just a simple majority. And so while the goal was not to change the existing rule about when the mayor is allowed to vote, the goal was to make it clearer for the council members, for the mayor, and for the public to understand when their mayors are or are not allowed to vote. And so that's why I'm here to speak in favor of the bill. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Kavanaugh?
Thank you, Chair Kenny. Thank you for being here, Mr. Hines. So I'm from Omaha, so not as really familiar with the form of government of the other cities. So in these, was the city of the first class and the second class?
Correct.
So does the mayor sit on the city council?
The mayor presides in our cities over the city council meetings. So in both South Sioux City and Dakota City, the mayor attends all meetings, calls the roll, and otherwise conducts the meeting. And in rare circumstances, will cast a vote to break a tie or to provide the additional vote.
And are the number of city council members set by statute, or does each of those cities get to choose how many city council members they have?
Each city has its own council set by ordinance. In South Sioux, we have an 8-person council, and Dakota City is a 4-person council.
And are they elected at large or by district?
I believe South Sioux City has districts, but I think Dakota City might be at large. I'm not positive.
But the mayor's relationship to the city council is set by statute, not by the city.
That's correct.
And do you have vetoes and veto overrides?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear you.
Can the mayor veto city ordinance changes or the budget or anything like that, and then have a veto override by the council?
Yes.
But that's not something that the mayor can vote on in this context.
No.
Okay. And how are the terms different? What are the lengths of terms? Are they set by? Would they all be set by the city ordinance as well?
The
Lengths of
length,
term for the mayor or for the city council members?
I think that is in the city code, but the state law might control that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Law?
Thank you, Chairman. And I'm from Kearney. Kearney has a different form of government, but our mayor votes on all votes there. Will this affect Kearney's form of government?
I'm not familiar with Kearney's. Does Kearney have a home rule charter then?
We have a city manager.
Okay. I would maybe
And the mayor is part of the city council.
understood. So I don't believe that this bill would affect that. Christy might be able to answer that question better than me.
I was going to ask.
Okay. The focus of, again, the situations I have dealt with are in the 2 communities that we represent. And so the goal was to fix the mayor voting rules and the mayor council form of government. So if you have a different form of government, I don't believe this would change that.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other proponents?
Pass out to him, that's the type of equipment they have.
How you doing?
Good. Senator McKinney, members of the committee. My name's Gary Pearson, spelled like person, Garyperson. I'm the President and CEO of the North Platte Area Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development Corporation, but I'm also here representing the city of North Platte and Mayor Brandon Kelleher, going on record in support of LB 33. I think it's probably more appropriate. I just provided a support letter on our behalf of our 625 members of our corporation. We work very closely with the city, obviously very engaged in all the different things that happen at the city council level. And I think because our mayor was directly involved in the situation here, I'll paraphrase, read part of his letter here. During the fall of 2022, I was involved in a city council action where 3 members were absent due to illness or travel. The action required a specific percentage of the council members to vote in favor. However, state statute was unclear on the subject of the mayor voting on the issue in order to have the required number of votes in favor. North Platte City Council eventually resolved the issue in a subsequent meeting. However, this event provided an excellent example of the need for clarity in the statute. Mayors should be allowed to vote on occasions when their vote would alter the outcome of the decision. Such a practice would be consistent with the chairman's role and Robert's Rules of Order, provide for clarity in council processes, help communities leaders provide the most accurate application of public preference and legislation. Please vote in support of LB 33 as the bill progresses through the legislature. Just to give you a little background on what this was a citizen-led petition drive that got on the ballot. It was adopted by the voters on a 2-to-1 margin. And there was very little time between when the election happened and when the city had to provide the ordinance to the state. The risk here was you wouldn't get it filed with the state in time to where you'd lose the entire next quarter of potential revenue. This is a half-cent sales tax initiative. Even though the The statute's pretty clear. It says the council shall acknowledge the fact that the vote did occur. With the 3 members absent, there was one council member chose not to vote for it because she was not in favor of the initiative to start with. So she wanted to go on record, make it so it was a 4-1 vote. And because that doesn't constitute, it's a simple majority, but it doesn't constitute under the statute that it has to be the majority of the elected officials voting. That's what it occurred, and that's what was at stake. And so to make sure you follow the open meetings law, and you have to then follow and try to advertise specific meetings to waive the 3 readings in order to get it in place. That's what occurred and caused all the confusion. City attorney initially thought the mayor did have the right to vote, cast that vote, but then they later determined it was vague enough. They didn't want to risk, having lose this potential revenue. So that's why they went back and did that. Senator Lowe, I would mention that I spent 16 years as a city manager in a city manager form of government. So your question, I can tell you that those folks are all elected by 100% of the people. And so it's just the mayor is an equal member of the council, and the strong mayor city administrator form of government, that is not necessarily the case. But if you want to make an argument why the mayor should be allowed, they're the only elected official in that form of government that gets 100% of the people able to vote on. The other council members are elected basically in wards owned by only 25% of the public. So again, showing the validity behind why a mayor deserves the right to vote in those situations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? Come back.
Don't rush off.
Senator Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chairman McKinney. Thank you, Mr. Peterson, for being here. That was an interesting story. It must have been frustrating.
Was.
That scenario. So I'm trying, not familiar with the particular type of government, but the scenario you listed, you articulated, had the combination of both people being out sick, but also a voluntary abstention. And I wonder about the wisdom of making this change to allow for that, which I think potentially could be gamed, but that in conjunction with the, vacancies. So I just wanted to ask about, so that person abstained or didn't vote for this resolution on purpose. And in this scenario, their decision to not vote for it, gets undermined by a decision to add another vote.
Yeah, it was, there was a definite division in the council on this particular issue. In fact, because it took a supermajority vote to get it on the ballot in the first place, 3 of the 8 members chose not to want to move it on. So the citizens took it upon themselves. It involved a half-cent sales tax, infrastructure sales tax for the building of repurposing, rebuilding of a recreation center, and redoing an old swimming pool in the community. North Platte had the distinction of having the oldest outdoor and oldest indoor swimming pools, and it's definitely structures that are showing their age. It's an important issue with the public. They felt the council erred not letting the people vote on it. They took it upon themselves to put it on the ballot. But some of those hard feelings or whatever still carried over to where they still felt, one person felt compelled to vote against acknowledging it, and another one just abstained just out of also, their way of showing a personal protest.
But I guess my question is, in terms of making a change in statute to clarify it, what are your thoughts on, how are vacancies dealt with on the city council?
There's a little, the mayor winds up appointing someone. Obviously, they'll want to interview different people, have an application process. In this case, it was someone who had served their time quite well as a former county sheriff. And he had some health issues, some hearing problems, and he just chose to, for the good of the cause, he felt.
Right, I'm not talking about absence, I'm talking about vacancy. So the mayor would appoints for vacancy. I guess my concern is you set up a scenario under which you get a vacancy and you could hold that open for a while, and then the mayor just slots themselves in as the voter, right?
I think there's a timeline in the statute that says you have to appoint at a certain time. And obviously, we have election coming up fairly soon too, where that particular precinct was up for ward.
Thank you.
Senator Blunt, wait.
Yes.
Well, you just really don't want to talk to us right now.
In a hurry to get home.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, and it's mostly one of clarification.
Mhm.
So would I be correct if I said that the vast majority of councils have the ability to table an issue should some of these instances arise? So for example, somebody is sick and they want that person or persons to vote. 3 people on the council get the flu all at the same time, which we know happens actually quite often because they hang out a lot. They could table it until they had a quorum, until they had more people to vote. Is that correct?
In normal circumstances, that kind of a scenario works. They would
Right.
just table the issue. But where you had a pending deadline here, which really meant several $1 million of potential revenue coming to help support what the people voted on, overwhelming margin, you'd risk that losing that whole quarter of revenue. So
And
that's
I'm not arguing
Yeah.
that.
okay.
I'm just saying more often than not, though, you have the ability to table it.
Sure,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Any other questions? No? Thank you. Are there any other proponents?
Good afternoon, Senator McKinney and members of the Urban Affairs Committee. My name is Christy Abraham, CHRISTY ABRAHAM, here representing the League of Nebraska Municipalities. I want to start by thanking Senator Jacobson for introducing this bill for us. As you have heard from the past testifiers and the introducer himself, this has been an issue that we struggle with. And my coworker Lash and I were talking before I came over. This is probably the number one issue that we get calls about. And then that's, I'm sure, a surprise to a lot of people. This is what people call about. When can my mayor vote? We certainly appreciate the current language and what it was intended to do. We have a lot of second-class cities that have 4-person councils. And it's not unusual in 4-person councils. You might have someone be sick, obviously. You might have someone be gone. There's also a lot of issues of abstention. In small communities, you may sit on the city council and you also own the plumbing business. And you have to abstain from certain votes because you may have a conflict. So abstention, that's one of the reasons that language was added with vacancies and abstention, because that does come up quite a bit. So we really do think this takes care of the issues. I know there have been lots of questions and they're all really good and I appreciate that. Senator Lowe, you've already had your question answered. City manager form of government, you're not impacted under this bill. You have your own set of statutes and we're not amending those. So you're all good. Senator Kavanaugh, in terms of vacancies, again, vacancies are not unusual in cities of the second class. State law is very specific that you have 28 days to fill those vacancies, so 4 weeks. That can also sometimes be a challenge for our smaller communities because they only meet once a month. But we're always very clear when they call in that the vacancy needs to be filled within that 28 days. So there's also often a special meeting called where, as you heard, the mayor proposes a name and then the rest of the council votes to determine to fill that vacancy. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I know you've already asked a lot of great questions, but I just want to reiterate again, this language does clarify a lot of the questions we get. We have a lot of city officials who still think the law is a tie, that the mayor gets to vote when there's a tie. And the law has actually been changed a couple of times since that language. So we just hope that this is going to take care of all the issues that we hear about. And I'm happy to answer any questions, Senator. Thank you.
No problem. Are there any questions? No? Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other proponents? Any opponents? Anybody here to testify in the neutral? Seeing none, Senator Jacobson, you're welcome to close.
Well, thank you. Since I'm coming back for the next bill anyhow, I just will close. But let me just clarify a couple things. Senator Day, nice to see you here. I can fill you in along the way here if you need me to.
Thank you.
I think you've heard a lot of situations here, and I would want to reiterate again. We've got a situation. My senior credit officer serves on the city council in North Platte. So there are a number of times when we do have conflicts, and he's got to abstain on issues that would impact the bank. And so that will create an abstention that normally, wouldn't occur, but we're very cautious about that. We're an 8-member council. It's also important to note that of course, our mayor is elected. I think in the city manager, cities like Kearney, they actually, as I understand it, they elect their city council and then they elect the mayor. I think the council elects the mayor, don't they, in your form of government. So, but I think a big part of it is as you look at a lot of the other smaller communities out there, class 2 cities in particular, second class cities, you will have smaller boards, smaller councils. And so it does get difficult if somebody's missing, sick or otherwise, and if they're not meeting very often, it does become cumbersome. So the bill was really meant to just kind of clean up some consistency. It seems like the last time it was cleaned up, it made it more confusing. So with that, since there are no one speaking in opposition and no neutral testifiers and not heavy loaded questions, I learned a long time ago that when you've made the sale, you should probably quit selling. So I'm going to stop here and ask for any questions.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? No? We'll close the hearing on LB 33. All right, we'll open the hearing on LB 98. Again, if you're here to testify on this bill, please feel free to move forward. Senator Jacobson, you can start.
Thank you. I'm back. Chairman McKinney and members of the Urban Affairs Committee, my name is Senator Mike Jacobson, MikeJacobson. I am before you today to introduce LB 98, which brings several revisions to the community development law and specifically redevelopment plans receiving an expedited review under section 18-2155, also known as micro TIF. The bill is designed to improve the ability to finance projects and clarify the duties and powers of the city. It also modifies 18-2109 to clarify that more than one designation can be done within an area of substandard and blight of a substandard and blight study without the need for an additional study or public hearing. High interest rates and high construction costs continue to plague the rural housing markets. It will take every tool necessary to help solve this problem. Tax increment financing has been used successfully to build new housing subdivisions, but rehabilitating older homes in established neighborhoods can be another cost-effective way of improving the affordable housing inventory. Micro TIF has been in place for a few years now, but it needs to be improved if we want to see greater utilization of the program. LB 98 is designed to make much needed changes to the micro TIF program to accomplish this objective. As a refresher, TIF is allowed to be used in areas that have been designated as blighted and substandard. To achieve this designation, a study must be completed by a qualified individual to make certain that the area meets all the requirements. The governing board of the community must declare the property as blighted and substandard before ultimately approving the project. Micro TIF currently does not allow for future tax increments to be dedicated to the repayment of the note issued at the inception of the project, but instead provides for the property tax payments derived from the project improvements to go to the current homeowner as they're received, as opposed to the initial developer/note holder. As a result, the developer is unable to borrow against the note to offset some of the construction costs to rehabilitate the property because they can't ensure that that income stream will continue to come to them. LB 98 makes 3 needed changes to the current micro TIF law. First, it allows for blight studies to be conducted on larger parcels, but allows the governing body to select smaller portions of the larger study areas for the blight and substandard designation. This keeps a smaller portion of the community to be declared blighted and substandard, blighted, and reduces the cost of doing multiple studies. Second, the bill allows for the incremental tax proceeds generated from the project to be paid to the holder of the note, thus allowing the note to be capitalized at the inception of the project. This would be consistent with all other TIF projects under regular TIF and affordable housing TIF. Finally, the bill also allows for the governing body to approve each individual project and allows for the governing body to limit the number of projects approved at any time. This keeps the governing body in control of the number and character of the projects. It should also be noted that micro TIF is not allowed to be used in cities of the metropolitan class and the primary class. I believe that these much needed improvements will significantly help to jumpstart this program and allow more aging homes to be rehabilitated and create truly affordable housing in rural areas. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any proponents for LB 98?
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for your service. I know you're so well paid. My name is Mike Bacon, Mikebacon. I worked on my first TIF project 30 years ago to help our local community, and that's all I do. And so don't tell my mama I'm a TIF lawyer. She thinks I play piano in a bar. Senator Jacobson is a friend of mine and asked me to take a look at this bill, and I've made some suggestions. The original micro TIF was pretty messy for all the reasons that the senator described. A couple of things that are there as it exists today. If there's an area that's declared blighted and substandard, then if the city says it will engage in this type of a TIF project, the city council then loses absolutely all control. They are required to approve the plan. So if a billionaire wants to take advantage of this type of project, they have no ability to say no. There is no cost benefit analysis required. There is no look at the impact of what happens to the city. So that is significantly different than the current TIF statutes that do not allow you to deploy tax funds to a project. Secondly, as it sits right now administratively, it is terrible to deal with. For $50, the poor city clerk and city treasurer have to deal with tax payments over a 15-year period. And they can only pay it to the whole owner of record. So you can get up to 4 or 5 different tax checks during the year to pay on TIF projects. The two that go prior to a delinquency date plus the state's refund. So you can get 4 payments in and have to go check before you pay everyone out to see who holds title for every one of those projects, because that's the way the current statute is drafted. By paying it to the holder of the TIF note, you can just pay that one person and not have to go spend that time. The way TIF generally works today is TIF note or TIF bond is issued to a developer. They go to the banker and say, I need to borrow some money against this. That cannot happen because you don't know that that TIF is it ever going to be paid back to the individual you're loaning to. There's currently no way to revoke the area that, or revoke the process of doing a micro blight. And so that has been fixed. Micro blight is talked about quite a bit, but the blighting piece that Senator Jacobson has put in here actually does allow micro blight. I represent a fairly large city that would like to pick and choose areas to say, let's go see if we can talk that person into rehabbing their project without having to blight this whole area. And they can't do that presently without being included in a large area. So this allows people to pick and choose. Other than that, those are the major areas. I would say that as the bill sits right now, or as the law sits right now, it could be, you could be accused of abusing tax revenue because there's no but-for test. You can't charge interest on the note. It's just a continual payback of the funds. And there's no limitation on how much you pay back. It's just you get all your taxes for 15 years, regardless of how much you've spent. So this has a provision, this bill has a provision and it says you can only get it to the amount of the agreed upon cost and you have to disclose what those are. So I'll stand down. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Senator Blood?
Thank you, Chair. You said you helped a little bit with this bill? You
I
helped with the package
I reviewed
bill?
a couple of pieces, yes.
I'm not sure if I should be asking you or Senator Jacobson this
It's his
question.
fault.
So his fault? All right. So why retroactive?
You have some TIF projects out there that qualify. Under that scheme, you have to check and pay who the landowner is for those. That's just the way it's set up currently. If you go to a new regime, those notes follow the land owner and not the original developer. So this cleans it up and says, it goes on to the originator who gets the TIF benefit. It's not very useful the way it sits now. It's pretty ugly.
So why would you remove the submission of building permits then? Just to remove one more step? Because some communities, I was trying to figure out, and I couldn't see that in the legislation, like which class of cities this applies to. Because I know you look at like a community like Bellevue, there is a planning commission.
Mhm.
It sounds like your experience is there is no planning commission where you come from. It just goes right to the council.
Almost every community has a planning commission.
Right.
And so it's the process for this, a normal TIF bill. There's a public hearing in front of the planning commission, public hearing in front of the city council, and either a community development agency or community redevelopment authority. All three entities weigh in. That's eliminated. If a request is filed, it doesn't go to the redevelopment authority, it doesn't go to the planning commission, and the council can't do anything but approve it. So that's the way it's set up now. The city council cannot limit the number of projects, and they can't decide whether or not they want to kick one to the curb. They all come through.
But ultimately, doesn't the buck stop with the council when it comes to this type of financing?
No, once it's put in place, it can't be stopped. Once you decide you're going to participate in this and pass a resolution saying, we'll allow this process to begin, you sit back. And the only way that you can stop it currently, if you don't fill out the blanks correctly on the application, it just goes.
I guess I'm not talking about stopping it. I'm talking about, it almost feels like you're trying to take authority away from people who ultimately are responsible for the bottom line of how TIF works in their community. And I find that concerning. So I'm going to keep listening and see what everybody else has to say. And because that's how I'm reading the bill. But I'm going to sit here and listen.
Okay, yeah, that's not the impact. You actually are giving it back to the council. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? No? All right, thank you. Are there any other proponents?
Good afternoon, Andrew Willis, ANDREWWILLIS. I'm an attorney with Klein Williams. I represent quite a number of communities with tax increment financing and quite a number of developers utilizing tax increment financing. So I kind of see this from both sides. The changes that are proposed by LB 98 to the micro-TIF statute, I think would be very beneficial on both sides, really, to make micro-TIF the expedited process for these smaller TIF projects as effective as it's intended to be. Particularly I'll hit a couple of points. What LB 98 would do, in one hand, is allow for cities to set the number of projects that can be approved. It adds standards to how they would be approved, allows them to opt out at a later time. Again, this does give more authority to these cities, more ability for these cities to control how the micro-TIF program looks in their community, in particular, like the additional standards for approval, having that laid out a little bit clearer. It's always more beneficial to have that clarification when approving this, especially because this is an expedited process compared to what I'd call the quote unquote typical TIF review process. So I think those additional standards really do help and should be beneficial for each community as they look at a micro-TIF program. Clarifying the language on the issuance of TIF indebtedness, I think this really does make a big difference when looking at a project. As written right now, Section 2155, again, as it's already been mentioned, the TIF payments are made to the owner of the property, and that is the owner of the property if property is transferred later. Whereas, the way a redevelopment project like this works, if somebody comes in to build a home, for example, and utilizes the expedited process, the development, those eligible TIF costs that they're incurring, that TIF is intended to repay those costs. Really, they're going to go out and need to go to a bank, find a lender. The lender is going to provide those funds, and then that tax increment will repay that over time. If that's the way it's written right now, it's difficult for those lenders to ensure they'll be repaid, because if that home, for example, is sold during that 15-year period, these TIF payments stay with the owner of the land. It just doesn't quite work the same way in the expedited process as it does in, again, what I'll call the typical process. This is meant to be simpler, and I think those were just some things that were overlooked, and that will make it actually a workable program, or a more workable program, I should say. I did want to comment on the building permit question. I was involved in one specific project earlier, it would have been last year, where we had on the developer side, where we had a project that would have otherwise qualified for the micro-TIF, and we're going through the micro-TIF process, had the application filled out, but except for, and that was the one thing that stopped this project, because a developer in these scenarios is looking at, usually looking at tax increment financing very early on in the process, because that's a piece of the funding to see if this project will even be feasible without TIF. I mean, if that TIF isn't there, they have to figure out if this project works from a financing perspective. So in this case, the city correctly said, well, we need the building permit. And we said, well, we don't have a building permit. We're not that far in the process, because you have to figure out the financing before you've got to that step. So what this does, really, that was, and that's not required in the full hearing process. You're not required to have a building permit at the time of the application is submitted. So this is an extra step on these smaller projects that actually makes it more difficult to get to. And that was one example where that was specifically happened. Again, all in all, I think that these changes clarify, add a little more ability for this program to be workable, give a little more
guidance and authority on the city side for how to make this work. And I think these changes will be beneficial for a lot of communities, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other proponents?
Senator McKinney and members of the Urban Affairs Committee. My name is Christy Abraham, Christy Abraham, here representing the League of Nebraska Municipalities. Just as a little bit of a background, micro-TIF is sort of a term that we all use for this. That's not what it's called in statute. In statute, it's called expedited review. The reason we like the word micro-TIF is because the intent of micro-TIF, which was created by Senator Groney, I think it's been maybe 3 or 4 years now, Senator Groney had this idea that sort of an individual person should be able to apply for TIF and get some of the benefits of TIF if they're just doing a small project on their home. I think he was worried about, rundown and dilapidated properties in his town. And he thought, well, if you let just an individual person be eligible for TIF, wouldn't that be great? Maybe that would encourage more people to do improvements on their home. And there wouldn't have to be these giant redevelopment plans. You could just be a single person going in, filling out an application and getting micro-TIF. So we call it micro-TIF because expedited review just seems too confusing. So we certainly appreciated that Senator Groney tried to make this as simple as possible. So there was one application that you filled out. If you filled it out correctly, you were going to get micro-TIF. There are a handful of municipalities that have passed a resolution to do micro-TIF, but only a handful. And many of them have expressed concerns to us about that they're not ready to do micro-TIF quite yet because of some of their concerns. And this bill addresses a lot of them. The first one, and you've heard this before, I just want to repeat. This bill allows municipalities to set the limit on the number of applications. That was something that our larger communities were really concerned about, is what if we get 200 applications? Under the bill and under the law that was passed, you could only have a $50 application fee. So I think there was some concern with some municipalities is we're going to lose money if we allow micro-TIF, because $50 is not going to cover all the costs that we have to do these applications. So we're very grateful for that change. Municipalities can set a limit on how many micro-TIF applications they take. Second of all, it allows a municipality to deny a micro-TIF application for certain reasons that are outlined in the bill. We're very grateful that this bill outlines them because, as the previous testifier mentioned before, you fill out the application, you've put all the information, you filled out all the blanks, you are going to be approved for micro-TIF. So we're grateful for that change. And finally, there is explicit language that allows a municipality to revoke their resolution that allowed for micro-TIF. So as the law stands now, the municipality who wants to do micro-TIF passes a resolution, and then micro-TIF can be done in that community. This bill says, you know what, if you decide this isn't working, we're going to allow you to revoke that resolution and you don't have to do micro-TIF any longer. I also just want to mention that micro-TIF can only be used in cities that are located in counties with less than 100,000 in population. So if you are a municipality in Douglas, Lancaster, or Suffolk County, you don't get to use micro-TIF. Again, Senator Groney felt that this micro-TIF thing was really something that should happen in non-urban settings. So I'm happy to answer any other questions that you have, but the League is supportive of this legislation.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Senator Kavanaugh?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Abraham, for being here again. So has anybody gotten a micro-TIF yet?
Yes, these are, I did a very scientific Google search. Plus, some communities have actually called to tell us that we're doing it. But Norfolk has it, Tilden, Nebraska, North Platte, and Beatrice are the communities that I know of. There might be more, but those are the ones that I'm aware of that have passed the resolution to do micro-TIF.
But do you know if anybody's received TIF under those city resolutions?
I apologize. Yes, it's my understanding that some applications have been approved. Yes, but I apologize, Senator. I don't know how many. I could probably try to find out, but I don't know how many.
Thank you. I was curious.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thanks so much.
No problem. Any other proponents?
Mr. Chairman, Senators, my name's Gary Pearson, spelled like person, Gary Person. I'm the President, CEO of the North Platte Area Chamber Development Corporation. Also testifying as a proponent, but also representing the Nebraska Economic Developers Association Legislative Council, which represents approximately 300 members statewide, and the city of North Platte and Mayor Kelleher, who also submitted a letter that's being passed out right now to you. The revisions presented by Senator Mike Jacobson in introducing LB 98 are excellent changes, very much needed for micro TIF projects. I don't want to reiterate all the points that have already been made, but I'm telling you, you've got two of the finest minds sitting here in the chambers right now and dealing with redevelopment projects and use of tax increment financing and the complexities that being. Senator Jacobson has had 24 years experience as a Community Redevelopment Authority chairman, as well as his many years of banking experience. And Mike Bacon, who said he's been spending 30 years here. I can tell you, I've been doing TIF projects with Mike Bacon for those 30 plus years. So I've got a lot of experience, a lot of scars and bruises and going through the public process. So I understand it well, and I'm a big proponent of TIF overall and the wonderful things it does to help revitalize communities. The two primary things I see that are critical in this and all the proposed changes is, number one, you could do a comprehensive study of the community and define what are the eligible areas. All Nebraska communities are obviously aging. A lot of our housing stock was built somewhere between 50 and 125 years ago. You have large sections of communities that are badly in need of redevelopment because they were developed some time ago. And communities sometimes are reluctant to blight an entire area because they're restricted by the amount of percentage they can do in a community. In class 1 cities, that's 35%. So there's that reluctance. If you were just be able to study it and say, these are eligible areas, and then as each particular project comes along, you can just define that lot that qualifies, so you're not endangering the overall percentage. I saw that as one deterrent why only 4 communities have come forward and adopted this. The other is the complexity of how do you finance these projects? And there was no real clear defined way that a bank could use this as collateral on potential revenue coming forward from specific projects. So this does help clarify that as well. So I think those in particular are going to be really good changes. I can tell you, I've been personally contacted by well over 40 different people who are really excited about this. Is something that's going to help the small developer, the individual older home, older commercial building downtown that want to do upper floor housing, those kind of things. And so people are really engaged, really excited about it. The mayor, in fact, says the city has had about 40 different people approach them on an application process. We've only seen 2 actually come forward and get approved. And it's because of the confusion and especially in not being able to get the projects financed or just figuring out there's just no way I can make this pay. So these are very much good changes and support them to a great degree. And it's like I said, the statewide Economic Development Association is totally on board with this as well.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions? No? Thanks. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? Anyone here to testify in the neutral? Seeing none, Senator Jacobson, you're welcome to close.
Thank you again, Senator McKinney and members of the Urban Affairs Committee. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak before you and try to enlighten you as to the ideas on this particular bill. I think what I'd like to do is clarify, just reiterate a couple of things. And I know Senator Blood, you had an excellent question earlier in terms of how does that impact the city? And what this does is it gives the city much, much more control. The way the bill was originally drafted, the bill was drafted with, as it's been enumerated, $50 fee. Once the city opted into micro-TIF, they were locked in. They had to accept every project. If they applied for it and completed the application, they were automatically approved. City had no opportunity to shut it down. So it was really meant, it was very aggressive, and it was meant to probably cut past the CRA. Not the CRA is not involved at all in micro-TIF, nor is the planning commission. It goes directly to the city council, assuming that the property's been declared blighted and substandard. It's the council that makes the decision under this expedited review. What this bill does is it gives the city much more control. Number one, it says that the city can opt out at any time. The city will review each project and make sure that those projects do fit the intent of what micro-TIF was for. And if it didn't, they could reject that project. The $50 fee is still the fee. So the other problem that was enumerated and that we have a concern about is under the original plan, there was no ability to do what a normal TIF project does. And you have a handout there that shows the funds flow of how typical TIF works, how the repayment works. Okay. Under micro-TIF, that doesn't happen that way. Under micro-TIF today, the future payments are going to be sent. The county treasurer is going to collect the money. They're going to give it to the city treasurer, who's likely the treasurer for the CRA. And then they're going to, or in this case, the city treasurer will get the money. And then they have to go figure out who the homeowner is and distribute that money to them for 15 years. And they get paid $50 up front one time to do this. Okay. Just doesn't make sense. So the other thing that's a problem is that if a developer comes in and wants to rehabilitate a project, and you go in and do a major remodel and you apply for micro-TIF, you have no way to monetize that money to use it up front like you normally do with TIF, because you don't have the repayment stream coming to you unless you agree to hold the house or hold that property for 15 years. So you sell it 2 years later, well, then that revenue goes to the future homeowner. Now you can argue, well, you're going to get a higher price for the house when you sell it. No. How are you going to do that? Because the appraiser is not going to appraise that house any higher simply because it's got this imputed or inferred property tax payment coming in the future. There's no basis to appraise the house higher. So therefore, you're not going to be able to sell it at a higher price. So it just negates the whole concept of being able to do this. This needed to be changed so that it would work just like regular TIF, so that the developer, if the developer came in and took an older home and wanted to completely rehab that home or tear it down and build new, they'd be able to capture the TIF to use, and they could use that as upfront cost to do the rehabilitation, turn around and sell that home, and they can sell it and they get subsidized in terms of what their cost was, and brings that house down to something that would actually encourage them to truly come in and build it. One of the problems we've got today across rural Nebraska, and you're finding it in Lincoln and Omaha as well, but across rural Nebraska, is if you go out today and you're going to bring in a new subdivision, you're going to spend between $65,000 and $75,000 per lot getting that lot ready to go. But I can tell you, and Senator McKinney, Senator Wayne, and I have had this conversation a number of times about the difference between North Omaha and the north side of North Platte. You know what the difference is? Almost none. Okay, because you've got poverty there, you've got older homes, you've got dilapidation. If we're going to change that, and we're going to get older homes rehabilitated, this is the program that'll make it happen. You're not going to spend $65,000 to develop those lots. Those lots already have street to them. They already have water. They already have sewer. You can go in and buy those older houses, tear it down and build new under micro-TIF. And all of a sudden you've got the subsidy that makes sense to make that happen. And so instead of expanding our city limits, we're going to be able to go into the interior part of our city and on our north side, and we're going to be able to fix some of the dilapidation that's occurring there, and probably reduce crime and make our city that much nicer city. This will happen throughout the state in the class 1 and class 2 cities and villages if we make these changes. I think it's an important piece to come into the arsenal of what we're trying to get done. So that's why I'm very focused on trying to make these changes, expedite it, get it done, so that we can start rehabilitating more of these homes. Clearly, you look at the price of, or the cost of interest today, what the affordability index is right now, it's very, very poor. A lot of what we've talked about this year, and we'll continue to talk about this year in the legislature, is figure out how are we going to be able to provide more housing for real work in affordable housing, making handicap accessible, doing the things we need to do. This is a way that we can do it without any money from the legislature, without taking any money out of the pockets of the taxpayers that exist, because you know what? With TIF, it's self-funding. If the project gets built, or if the project otherwise would not have been built, that tax revenue wouldn't be there. The only way that tax revenue comes in is if we build the project. So we're allowing that developer to take that increase during that next 15 years to repay them for the incentive to build that house today. I think it's a win-win. I really hope that you will move forward and move this bill forward. And I'd stand for any more questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thanks.
Thank you.
That'll close. Oh, and for the record, we had 2 proponents, 0 opponents, and 0 neutral. Thank you. That closes our hearing for today, and we'll go into exec.
Turn it off.
Video needs to be on.
Yeah, for exec session, we'll